This video is about modernism and some of its characteristics and how it got started. And it really began during World War I and right after it. And the disillusionment that followed the terrible war caused many to believe that goodness and other good virtues, along with honesty, really did nothing to prevent bad things from happening, like the war itself. The cynicism permeated the modernism genre in the 1920s and led to books being written like Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. And if you haven't read it, it ends with everyone the protagonist knows and loves dying in kind of terrible ways. And it's also set during the war, which is one more way the war influenced modernism. Modern poetry was aimed at making it new, and it was experimental in a whole new way. It broke from tradition and, in many ways, reflected the general feeling of the 1920s. Modernism writing, in general, can really be compared with flappers of the 1920s, and they kind of broke with all tradition and did their own thing and did things that were scandalous for women of the time to do, like how they dressed and danced. And really, all writing of that time went a totally different way than it had during the previous era, and sparked a whole new era of literature. Many writers of the time believed that war and industry had shattered the human spirit, just as the Civil War had destroyed the idea of romanticism. Many also believed that their tradition of rhyming in poems was kind of a waste of time, and broke with that idea, and used free verse and other things like that instead. In general, it could be said that these writers were kind of like anti-conformists, and they fought against everything that was believed to be traditional. E. Cummings, for example, really didn't use any kind of grammar in his writings, and didn't use any punctuation, and kind of totally broke with traditional thinking of how poetry should be. And that really helped to portray the modernist spirit. The lack of religious feeling during this period was also pretty obvious, and was another characteristic of modernism. Ideas that the church had held for so long were under attack by scientists, especially Charles Darwin, and his idea of evolution instead of creationism really sparked a lot of controversy, especially in the South. And that led to the John Scopes trial, which really made a big national deal about the teaching of evolution in schools. And that really just totally went against their traditional belief that the church held. And it was reinforcing the idea that we really weren't made in the image of God. The characters in modernist literature were not the superheroes that exist today. They were, for the most part, normal people, just going about their lives trying to survive, and they were flawed and far from perfect. But they were heroes not because of their personalities, but because of their actions. Like the hero, protagonist from Grapes of Wrath. He was a hero not for some arbitrary reason, but because he went through so much to give his family a good life. Many of the stories of the modernist period show the darker side of life. Most even end without the happiness that we see today in many stories, but in depression instead, with the protagonist dead or losing everything that they love. In The Old Man and the Sea, another story by Hemingway, for example, he spends days in a boat chasing one fish, and he catches it, but by the end of the story, after towing it behind his boat for days, sharks totally eat it and destroy it, and he has to go home without any fish, back to live in poverty. In another Hemingway story, A Farewell to Arms, he falls in love with a nurse during World War I in Italy while he's in the hospital, and she soon becomes pregnant, but once again, the story ends with her dead in childbirth, and the child dead as well. This dark, depressing side of life is and was also a distinctive trait of modernism. Overall, really, a few of the things that set modernism apart from everything else is how depressing it was. Like all the Hemingway stories, pretty much all of them that I've read, and really sad. And its departure from the norm and its total rebellion against all tradition and other thinking that was really important during the last few decades before modernism really took over.